Chapter 14. A Call to Arms. We have described the situation as it is at this point in the transition to sustainability. We have most of the tools and know-how to make the required changes for our future, crucially without reducing well-being today. This book is a handbook for much of the remainder, proven solutions with high merit to prioritise proactively over distracting time wasters, technical innovations in progress to supercharge the transition, market principles to support the investment needed for deployment at the speed and scale required, and a supergrid to connect it all together. But time is of the essence. Cognitive dissonance amid a climate emergency. As stated by the UN Environment Programme, the science is clear. The world is in a state of climate emergency, and we need to shift into emergency gear. Humanity's burning of fossil fuels has emitted enough greenhouse gases, GHGs, to significantly alter the composition of the atmosphere, and average world temperature has risen between 1.1 and 1.2 degrees Celsius. Emissions and global warming. The odds are that 2024 will eclipse 2023 as the warmest year on record. This was flagged with record global averages recorded in June, adding yet again to the consecutive months exceeding the crucial 1.5 degrees Celsius threshold in the Paris Agreement. The higher that global average temperatures climb, and the longer they stay at such heights, the greater the odds that potentially devastating climate tipping points will be triggered. Current climate policies imply a high risk for tipping of critical Earth system elements. Even if temperatures return to below 1.5 degrees Celsius of global warming after a period of overshoot. A study published in Nature Communications in August 2024 indicated this risk can be minimised if the warming is swiftly reversed. That is why reducing emissions in the current decade is crucial for the stability of the Earth system functions. Researchers from the Potsdam Institute for Climate Impact Research, the International Institute for Applied Systems Analysis, and other institutes concluded. They analysed the tipping risks for 4 interconnected core climate tipping elements: the Greenland ice sheet, the West Antarctic ice sheet, the Atlantic Meridional Overturning Circulation, AMOC, and the Amazon rainforest. While this turnaround is possible, the research confirms the risk of crossing these tipping points increases exponentially with each further tenth of a degree rise. The collective progress report card failures cannot be denied. Overall global emissions are at record levels. Increased fossil fuel extraction and permitting suggest a recklessness attempting to defy that reality. 50 billion tonnes of greenhouse-forcing gases were released into the atmosphere by 2019. The graph in Figure 49 includes greenhouse-forcing gases emitted from other sources in addition to energy. CO2 accounts for around 3/4, 74.4% of total emissions. Methane contributed 17.3%, nitrous oxide 6.2%, and other emissions, HFCs, CFCs, SF6, 2.1%. Over 20 years, methane is 84 times more potent than CO2. It has been rising much faster than CO2 emissions. Long promoted to householders as a clean fuel, from a climate perspective, fossil, aka natural gas, is anything but. The singular failure to slash methane emissions, arising mainly from oil and gas production, as well as agriculture, threatens to keep critical Paris Agreement temperature goals out of reach. As Figure 50 illustrates, there was a huge uptick in methane release after shale gas production grew exponentially in the US after 2008. Could this be a coincidence? Extreme weather. 2024 brought little comfort, as the combination of more ferocious and more frequent extreme weather events have erupted over much of the planet. A July heat wave in the form of a heat dome that hit southern Europe during the Paris Olympics brought temperatures in excess of 40 degrees Celsius, while attribution scientists concluded the fossil-fueled climate crisis had made its temperatures 2.5 to 3.3 degrees Celsius hotter. The world watched athletes swelter in 35 degrees Celsius heat. If the atmosphere wasn't overloaded with emissions from burning fossil fuels, Paris would have been about 3 degrees Celsius cooler and much safer for sport. Noted Dr. Friedrich Otto, a climatologist at Imperial College London and member of the World Weather Attribution Group behind the analysis. It is one of many hundreds of these attribution studies that have now been completed, covering heat waves, wildfires, droughts, floods, and storms. They include a growing number of otherwise impossible events and demonstrate how human-caused heating has already supercharged extreme weather across the globe. As long as humans burn oil, gas, and coal, heat waves will get hotter, and more people will die premature deaths, Otto added. The good news is that we don't need some magic solution to stop things from getting worse. We know exactly what we need to do, and have the technology and knowledge needed to do it. Replace fossil fuels with renewable energy and stop deforestation. The faster we do this, the better. With notably little mainstream media coverage, extreme heat in Saudi Arabia in June 2024 was responsible for the deaths of more than 1,300 pilgrims during Hajj. Millions of Muslims travel from all over the Arab world to Saudi Arabia for the annual Hajj pilgrimage to Mecca, fulfilling what is considered a lifetime religious obligation. According to the American Meteorological Society, Saudi Arabia has warmed 50% faster than the rest of the Northern Hemisphere. Heat and humidity levels are set to exceed the US National Weather's extreme heat stress threshold a fifth of the time between 2045 and 2053, once the pilgrimage returns to summer months, according to one study. As Jeff Goodell writes in The Heat Will Kill You First, heat is the first-order threat that drives all other impacts of the climate crisis. And as the temperature rises, it is revealing fault lines in our governments, our politics, our economy, and our values. Fossil fuel expansion in the face of everything. UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres has repeatedly called out fossil fuel expansion seen in some of the world's wealthiest countries, most notably after The Guardian highlighted a surge in fresh oil and gas exploration in 2024, with countries such as the US and the UK, Norway, Canada, and Australia leading the charge, handing out a record 825 oil and gas licences in 2023. In the UK at least, the Labour Party was returned to Downing Street in early summer with a promise to end North Sea exploration licences. Elsewhere, severe cognitive dissonance remains, for now. This is a war. Those of us who devote our lives to solving this crisis are at virtual war with providers of the current energy solution, the oil and gas sector, whose products are the single biggest contributor to an overheating planet. It is not a war fought in the trenches with tanks, drones, or fighter jets. Nevertheless, it has a more devastating result than a war fought with nuclear weapons. The Chernobyl nuclear disaster happened in 1986, see Figure 51. This was equivalent to the explosion of a 30-megaton nuclear device. According to Mark Lallanilla, writing in Live Science, within 3 months of the Chernobyl accident, a total of 31 people died from radiation exposure, or other direct effects of the disaster. Between 1991 and 2015, as many as 20,000 thyroid cancer cases were diagnosed in patients who were under the age of 18 in 1986, according to a 2018 UNSCEA or UN Scientific Committee on the Effects of Atomic Radiation report. Iodine-131, a radioactive byproduct of nuclear fission, is the cause of these cancers. Other radioactive elements, such as cesium-137, which has a half-life of 30 years, have been dissipated since, all of which has left an insidious nuclear legacy that will persist for decades to come. By comparison, research by scientists at Harvard University, University of Birmingham, University of Leicester, and University College London shows the burning of fossil fuels, such as coal and oil, was responsible for 8.7 million deaths globally in 2018. We expect readers, when contemplating this number of deaths, might think as Stalin did when he said, "The death of a single person is a tragedy. The death of a million is a statistic." We are unable to conceive of a statistic which shows that nearly twice the population of Ireland were killed by use of fossil fuels in 1 year. The situation has not changed in the years since. Cited in Chapter 1 is research carried out by Mark Jacobson et al., which found that 7 million people died in 2019 from air pollution. The majority of these deaths were caused by breathing in tiny particles released by the combustion of fossils. The effects on lives and livelihoods of CO2 and other greenhouse gases are another dimension entirely. As we have highlighted, sea levels are rising, which will render a good proportion of the world's cities uninhabitable, entirely or in part because of their proximity to coastlines. There is deadly extreme heat and flooding, wildfires, and devastatingly extreme winds, to the point that our media is almost immune to the latest event. At the same time, global warming has caused the Sahara to migrate southwards, and Lake Chad has almost entirely dried up. See Figure 52. This underlines the reality of climate breakdown happening now, and those who are least responsible for it are suffering most. An estimated 10.7 million people in the vicinity of Lake Chad have had their lives changed completely between having to migrate, finding enough water and food, and trying to cope with the emergence of warlords who have emerged to do battle for dwindling resources. This graphically illustrates how climate disruption is not only an environmental and economic hazard, but also a threat to security. In tandem with this is the interlinked crisis of accelerating biodiversity loss. Since 1970, the overall population of land-based animals has been cut in half. It is a horrible indicator of nature in decline. There are probably 1 million such tales, all due to the devastation caused by the burning of fossil fuels. Long game of greed. It has emerged that Exxon knew of the effects of global warming in 1977. Clever managers merely read of the research carried out by the Irishman John Tyndall in 1861 while working at the Royal Institution in London. It was he who first identified that greenhouse gases cause heating of the atmosphere. Exxon realised this 48 years ago, before almost 70% of the current population on Earth were born. Exxon has spent almost all of the intervening time attempting to convince the world that global warming is not attributable to the use of fossil fuels. The science of greenhouse gases is well established and known by every oil and gas company. Why do they persist in funding right-wing politicians, their advisors, think tanks, and the media in all its facets, so as to continue to add to the overwhelming burden being placed on humanity by the burning of the fuels which they dig out of the earth? In a word, profit. In Figure 45, Oil and Gas Profits 2021 to 2023, we saw what is at stake. Each of the majors and the largest state oil and gas companies earn tens of billions in profits every year, while Saudi Aramco stands out, reporting an average of $128 billion annually over the last 3 years. To defend their position, almost $3 billion has been spent by big oil on subsidizing right-wing ideologues and politicians from oil and gas states in the US alone since 1998. In any other sphere of human endeavour, the killing of millions would be called out for what it is, a war crime on humanity and on future generations. Those who persist with it will be denounced by future generations, who will have to live with the almost unbearable consequences of current greed. There is now 50% more CO2 in the Earth's atmosphere than was there when Homo erectus, Homo neanderthalensis, and Homo sapiens emerged from former variations of sentient life. This additional burden of greenhouse gases will take centuries to extract from the atmosphere, where the only mechanism to do this is photosynthesis. Global cumulative emissions have risen from 10.2 billion tonnes of CO2e in 1910 to 53.9 billion tonnes in 2022, with a marked rate of increase from mid-century. The greed of the few powerful is inflicting an ocean of hurt on us and our children, our grandchildren, and their children. Controlling the narrative. That war being waged on us will be denied strenuously by the oil companies. We are being told by them and their agents that it is being done to fuel human needs, that there are no alternatives to the use of fossils for energy. Or if alternatives do exist, they are so flawed they cannot become the dominant way we humans generate and consume energy. They have preyed upon the ignorant and the malevolent and enlisted them in their ongoing struggle to enrich themselves. Successful war is usually waged by the clever who are bereft of human values. Values of respect for all life, values of living in harmony with one another and with nature, and the value of safety for all humans are cast aside. We have seen real cleverness in the way the oil companies have positioned their products. The largest oil company in the world, Saudi Aramco, has been a leading player in this war on current and future humanity. Saudi interests have spent close to $218 million since 2016 on lobbyists and others to influence US policy and public opinion, making it one of the top countries spending on US lobbying. According to disclosures to the Department of Justice, tallied by the Centre for Responsive Politics on their website, opensecrets.org. In 2023 alone, that figure was $87 million. The outreach was part of a major effort by LS2 Group on behalf of the Kingdom that has reached states including the Dakotas, Texas, Iowa, and Ohio. For a retainer of more than $125,000 a month, LS2 Group targeted local radio hosts, academics, event planners, sport industry officials, a former football player, and a ski and snowboard club owner, according to filings. LS2 Group, headquartered in Des Moines, is a firm that specializes in public relations, marketing, and government and public affairs. More widely, Saudi Arabia has poured $2.5 billion into American universities over the past decade, making the kingdom one of the nation's top contributors to higher education. Elsewhere, we have described the way oil companies have convinced bureaucrats, policymakers, and politicians that carbon capture and storage will work, and they should continue to allow the use of fossil fuels. Screaming headlines from BP in 2022 proclaimed the investment they are making in Drax Power Station to capture the carbon dioxide emitted by the burning of wood imported from the US. The investment is a reported £2.5 million for a company that made the following profits. Gross profit for the 12 months ending in June 2022 was $59 billion, a 47% increase year over year. BP annual gross profit for 2021 was $44 billion, a 56% increase from 2020. BP annual gross profit for 2020 was $28 billion, a 43% decline from 2019. £2.5 million is too small to be included as an incidental charge in their annual report. BP is run by professional engineers and business heads who are very aware carbon capture is possible but way too expensive to ever be used in a commercial sense, or to contribute even in a tiny way to removing CO2 from the electricity generating process. However, it made big headlines as it attempted to portray BP as a company who cares about the environment. In contrast, BP spent $10,280 million on oil and gas exploration in 2020 and 2021. During the 2022 round of UN climate talks in Egypt, COP27, Saudi Arabia highlighted an alternative vision, one that relies on large-scale carbon capture and storage. By 2027, the kingdom will build a facility capable of storing as much carbon dioxide as 2 million gasoline cars would emit in a year. Saudi Aramco runs a global network of research centres, including a lab near Detroit where it is developing a mobile carbon capture device, equipment designed to be attached to a gasoline-burning car, trapping greenhouse gases before they escape the tailpipe, an unnecessary modification to an EV. We also have seen the success of the hydrogen hype trumpeted in recent years. Oil and gas companies know hydrogen made from the electrolysis process is much too expensive to ever compete with batteries for road transport, or to compete with heat pumps for premises heating, or to be used as a storage medium, to be used to generate electricity, which would compensate for the variability and intermittency of renewables. All these facts are irrelevant to oil and gas companies. They readily admit the technology needed by mass electrolysis is not there yet. That is where their strategy reaches its real purpose, to delay electrification as the most effective pathway to decarbonisation. Readers may think these observations are far-fetched, argumentative, and unnecessarily combative. Just have a look at what the EU did as a result of the hydrogen campaign waged by the oil and gas companies. They stated they would spend €550 billion on hydrogen over coming years. They also drove a coach and four through their own recently enacted taxonomy proposals. Natural gas is sustainable, was the repeated mantra. Yet burning 1 tonne of natural gas releases 2.75 tonnes of CO2. Interested readers will find a litany of insidious denial, distraction, disinformation, deflection, and overall delay tactics deployed over decades by the oil and gas industry, spelled out compellingly in the 2021 book, The New Climate War, The Fight to Take Back Our Planet, by renowned climate scientist Michael E. Mann. It expands on the 2010 book, The Merchants of Doubt, how a handful of scientists obscured the truth on issues from tobacco smoke to global warming. The oil and gas war, so far waged with great success by the oil companies, is carried out on many fronts, from buying politicians where the national rules allow it, to inventing self-serving myths about carbon capture and storage and hydrogen. Their tactics have been incredibly successful. They have untold amounts of money, and they use it very effectively to suit their own purposes. There were 636 registered fossil fuel lobbyists at COP27. This then increased to a staggering 2,456 at COP28 in Dubai. How to win. So what is to be done? How can we win a good war, which isn't fought with arms, but where the threat is more devastating than nuclear conflict and infinitely more harmful for our species than COVID-19? Oil and gas companies use brains, money, and the inherent conservatism of our human tribe to continue their war. They have to be fought with a higher sense of purpose than making money for a few, fought with more enthusiasm and more imagination in the best interests of all global citizens, with heart for everything we love that is under threat today and tomorrow. Those of us who can be called old have to reach out to the Greta Thunberg generation and form a human division embracing every corner of the world to protect our environment and collective well-being. Collective action has been key to every social revolution in history. This one is uniquely intergenerational, as the Swiss climate grannies, Klima Seniorinnen, Greta's Fridays for the Future, and Mary Robinson's Project Dandelion make clear. We have what we need. We begin by recognizing that the raw materials, the tools, the human resources, and the cash already exist to win. We have enough wind, solar, hydro, biomass, and some nuclear to allow for the complete decarbonisation of electricity, road transport, heating and cooling, steel making, chemical feedstocks, aviation and shipping. Wind and solar are together the fastest growing source of electricity in history, confirmed in analysis from think tank Ember. They are growing fast enough to overtake rising demand, which will cause fossil fuels and their emissions to decline. Wind turbines and solar panels have overtaken fossil fuels to generate 30% of the EU's electricity in the first half of 2024, which is narrowing the role of fossil fuels, according to Ember analyst Chris Roslow. We are witnessing a historic shift in the power sector, and it's happening rapidly. That optimism should not distract from unfinished business. The same Ember analysis shows we are at just 30% renewables in global electricity, which itself is just 20 to 25% of the problem. In other words, we have only managed to address 6% of decarbonisation so far. But the good news is that electrification of heat and power shrinks the decarbonisation problem to a half or possibly less of the remainder, according to Paul Martin. To help the layperson understand why, the wonderful explainer video, Primary Energy, by Deutsche Welle, is a must-watch. We have most of the solutions, and in this book, a plan for much of the remainder. What we now need is the political will to remove the remaining barriers to deploy. Decarbonisation rates differ significantly across the globe. More than half of all new wind and solar capacity in the world was installed in China in 2023, with many analysts suggesting that country has now reached peak emissions. Meanwhile, the growth rate in Europe is lagging where it needs to be to displace fossil fuels as the economy electrifies. The Ember report states the EU's power sector decarbonisation has been achieved mostly in the context of falling electricity demand. It notes since 2000, 2008 was the only year with growing electricity demand in the EU, where clean electricity growth was higher than demand growth, resulting in a decrease in fossil generation. Apart from 2008, reductions in fossil generation have only occurred in years where demand fell. Climate-induced drought can risk levels of hydro and water-dependent nuclear generation as observed in 2022, reinforcing the need for higher installation rates of solar, storage and wind, with, as we have seen, the most support required for wind. Personal responsibility and systems change. In 2005, BP actively promoted the personal carbon footprint, which has successfully deflected blame to individuals as consumers. Now racked with climate anxiety and guilt, many are distracted by immaterial and uncoordinated individual efforts, attempting to address what they have been conditioned to see as their individual responsibility, rather than collaborating to demand a better system from those they elect to govern. Collectively, consumer choices are important, of course, but going to enormous efforts at the expense of using our political power is a losing battle when time is not on our side. Yet, where political activism on climate emerges, it is often led bravely by non-voting children, met with a mixture of pride and heartbreak among parents. Or it seems unfocused or radicalized, lacking the tools of information about the concrete changes really needed, such as those presented in this book. As an antidote to the anxiety of climate doomism, we could recommend a healthy dose of positive myth-bursting from data science-backed sources such as Dr. Hannah Reach and her acclaimed 2024 book, Not the End of the World: How We Can Be the First Generation to Build a Sustainable Planet, or Christina Figueres' podcast, Outrage and Optimism. Where there is agency, there is hope. And individually and collectively, we all have agency. Recognizing the responsibility and duty of care for current and future generations sits squarely with us, today's adults. We acknowledge that, as Mary Robinson's Project Dandelion reminds us. Every issue is a climate issue, and everything we do is for our children and grandchildren. With that in mind, we can enlist the spirit of our young people and empower them to join us in the demand for urgent action from our political leaders. Enshrining the principle of a duty of care for future generations is to advocate for those who cannot yet advocate for themselves, for those whose window will be forever shut if we fail to make the required progress now. Michael Liebrich spoke recently about superheroes of the transition, naming them as exponential growth, system solutions, great power competition, disappearing demand, and the primary energy fallacy. But then he spoke of the sixth superhero, a superpower that lies within all of us, reflecting that society has reached a tipping point beyond which it is unthinkable not to deal with climate change, pollution, and environmental degradation. He observed that for the younger generation, it is becoming unacceptable to burn fossil fuels. This, he observed, can create a virtuous cycle between the inevitability of the transition, the attraction of talent, the tipping of the balance of risk in favour of net zero solutions, and progress towards net zero. And we must give oxygen to this particular flame. This is an intergenerational issue, and we all have a role to play. We can call out the institutional inertia that should no longer be acceptable. We must empower and provide practical information to the upcoming generation, and together demand results from our politicians, policymakers, and state agencies. We can inspire them with hope and agency instead of the doom and anxiety which stifles action. We can share our know-how to drive this energy revolution faster and further. It is the work of the next 2 or more decades, with a role for every sector of our economy. We must command a duty of care for those current and future generations who cannot yet advocate for themselves. We can create a future where electricity is the only form of primary and secondary energy. As a primary energy source, electricity is made directly from wind, solar, and hydro to make green all current electricity generation. More electricity will be generated to power all road transport using batteries, and for premises, heating using heat pumps. As a secondary source, electricity is used to crack H2O and make green hydrogen to be used as a chemical feedstock, as a complete substitute for coking coal in iron ore smelting and in glass making. The European supergrid presents a complex challenge that requires comprehensive modelling and serious master planning drawing from expertise in mega project management. Key principles for master planning include starting with the end goal of a fully decarbonised power economy in 2050 and working backward to identify necessary milestones. The think slow, act fast approach emphasises careful planning while acting swiftly to avoid climate change effects. A unified, transient organisation with independent master architects is crucial for innovative and unbiased planning. Scrutinising assumptions and avoiding premature commitment through iterative planning help minimise risks. Adopting a modular design approach allows for flexibility and scalability, and an experienced team as well as learning from similar projects are essential for successful execution. Unfortunately, short-term considerations are interfering with the slightly longer-term overall solution to decarbonise. We refer to the purchasers of green electricity, who collectively have driven the price of wind and solar downwards to unsustainable levels when all European wind turbine manufacturers are loss-making at present. Capacity has been contracting at a time when the quantity of wind generation that needs to be built is a multiple of what it is today, between now and 2050 for complete decarbonisation. We build less than 360 megawatts of new wind each week in Europe, when we need a rate of over 900 megawatts to achieve net zero by 2050. At COP28, the world committed to tripling renewable energy installation by 2030, but we are not making nearly enough progress towards this yet. Investment is needed in factories, trained staff, and supply chains to meet this target. No investor will invest in a losing proposition, and the original equipment manufacturers, OEMs, are not generating enough cash from internal sources to meet these large production targets. If this situation doesn't change, and the wind energy sector is kept profitless, Europe has no chance of meeting its decarbonisation targets by 2050 or even 2100. Solutions are at hand, such as routing some of the carbon taxes to the wind sector or paying a cheap price compared with gas-fired generation, but one which allows wind developers and OEMs and their supply chains to install generating plant at profit. Right now, Europe relies on imports for the bulk of its energy, a situation compounded by the Ukraine war. In the first quarter of 2024 alone, the EU imported nearly €100 billion worth of energy products. We have become accustomed to buying oil, gas, and fissile uranium from foreign sources. We forget that various oil crises, such as occurred in 1973 and 1980, have condemned us to devastating recessions. During the winter of 2022/2023, we faced energy shortfalls and a potential recession because of the use by Russia of its natural gas leverage over us. All this can change. There is enough wind and solar in Europe and its surrounding waters to meet our entire energy demand many times over. To release this potential flood of green energy, energy systems of nation states have to become much more integrated with each other than is the case now. Our best times are ahead of us if we choose to create them. In the late 1940s and 1950s, Jean Monnet, Robert Schuman, Paul-Henri Spaak, Winston Churchill, Konrad Adenauer, and others proposed a solution to the international conflicts that Europe had suffered for the previous 15 centuries. And so, the coal and steel community was born. It has worked spectacularly well in its primary aim of allowing European populations to live in harmony. Now is the time to apply the same logic to our energy supply. We can, with the right policy choices, become totally self-sufficient in energy. And not just replicate what we do currently, we can create a green community of interdependent states. Much has progressed since the publication of the first edition. Rising in the East is China, as a clean energy and clean tech industrial leader, challenging Europe and other powers to step up in pace. There has been recognition of the need for the pan-European supergrid by EU energy ministers, and the role of clean energy for European competitiveness has been signalled clearly by Mario Draghi. Radical market reform must be on the agenda, with further European integration. These are but a start. Urgent policy decisions at national and EU levels are needed to bring about fundamental change, and the good policy we already have must be implemented fully and quickly. Every minute of delay is costing lives, pushing nature further into irreversible decline with wholesale loss of living things, and recklessly driving our world to catastrophic climate breakdown. The missing link is the inter-European logistic arrangement, which will allow major energy hotspots to be connected rapidly to major population centres where most demand is concentrated. We call this link the supergrid. Chapter Key Points. 1. We live in a time of cognitive dissonance amid a climate emergency, facing annual record global sea and land temperatures, while government-licensed fossil fuel extraction expands and fossil fuel companies enjoy bonanza profits. 2. This is a war, an ongoing battle with the polluters. 3. Fossil fuels are responsible for 8.7 million deaths globally, 2018. Let's not repeat Stalin. The death of a single person is a tragedy. The death of a million is a statistic. 4. World cities will disappear in the face of human-associated global warming, i.e., ever-rising carbon emissions. 5. Perpetrators have played a long game of greed. Exxon knew about the effects of global warming in 1977. 6. They control the narrative. More than $3 billion of lobbying lies have succeeded in sowing the seeds of climate change doubt. Clever campaigns deflect away from systems change to individual responsibility and disempowering doomism. 7. This is a war on humanity. The greed of the few powerful is inflicting an ocean of hurt on us and our children, grandchildren, and their children. 8. Oil and gas manipulate hype on insignificant renewable projects and distract and delay with pink elephant solutions. The hydrogen and carbon capture hype have too much of a say. 9. How can we win this war? A. We begin with the good news and recognise that the raw materials, the tools, the human resources, and the cash already exist to win. We have resources for enough wind, solar, hydro, biomass, and some nuclear to allow for the complete decarbonisation of electricity, road transport, heating and cooling, steel making, chemical feedstocks, flight, and shipping. B. The future already exists. It is just unevenly distributed. We can recognise what is working for a rapid transition elsewhere, such as China, and emulate this in Europe. C. We can deploy mega-project principles to plan and implement the mega-programme of mega-projects to be built over the next 2 decades, the renewable energy and port infrastructure, and the supergrid to make it all work and deliver clean, secure, affordable and price-stable energy for all. D. We must recognise the powerful inertia of incumbent actors, including fossil fuel companies and entrenched utilities, unmotivated to innovate despite all available solutions. We must regulate to protect ourselves, disempower the forces that harm us and everything we love. We must enlist the spirit of our young people. We can inform and empower them, and ourselves in their name, to demand the bold action required from our political leaders. Together we can be brave. F. We must change European policies immediately and start this work. We can take action now, during this political cycle. we can plan and build the supergrid.